ispirate sempre al cuore.
Welcoming the director of the film and his Manuel's office, and John C. Reilly.
So, good day, Mr. Reilly. Welcome to Austria, welcome to the Viennale, and congratulations on Heads or Tails, the quite playful spaghetti western homage you're here to present. What was it that drew you to this role, to this material, and why do you think is the western as a genre, with this not being your first one, still so prevalent and such an important tool for American myth-making?
Well, what drew me to this story was the character Buffalo Bill. I mean, it's like one of those amazing American characters that, as a boy, you maybe think like, wouldn't it be fun to be a cowboy like that? So, yeah, and then I met, you know, Ale and Matteo, and immediately realized these are really talented guys. Their first film, The Tale of King Crab, was so great. I also am a fan of folk tales and the kind of storytelling that they're interested in. And then we had some, it turns out we had some mutual film love in common, which is Treasure of the Sierra Madre, this great film that Humphrey Bogart did with John Huston, and in particular Walter Huston's character in that movie became our kind of touchstone for Bill Cody. You know, his style of speaking and this kind of like the way that Walter Huston would spin these tales, you know, it was a similar vibe that we thought worked for Buffalo Bill. And the Western in general, like, I actually think this is a really interesting Western, this movie. It's set in Italy, and it's about like a wealthy young woman trying to emancipate herself. That's usually not the stuff of Westerns, you know. So it's kind of a hybrid Western in that way, and I thought it was a really subversive and interesting use of the Western and Western characters to tell a story of a woman's emancipation. I thought that was a really cool way to use some of these, you know, cliches about the West. You know, a lot of it is untrue. You know, and Bill himself knew they were untrue, but he realized it's what people wanted to hear. So yeah, I thought it was a really interesting use of the Western genre in order to tell a new kind of story.
And as mentioned, you're playing Buffalo Bill, one of the most prominent figures of the American West, and a more or less morally ambiguous character. Nevertheless, you still manage to infuse him with a certain empathy and warmth, which I feel is, generally speaking, one of your biggest strengths as a performer. Why do you think is it so important to convey empathy through acting? And do you maybe even think that empathy in cinema, in arts, is sort of a rebellious act, might have a greater impact on society at large?
Yeah, it's a bit of a strange thing to say right now, that empathy is a rebellious act, because to me, empathy is the cornerstone of civilization. Empathy is what allows civilization to happen. You know, like our agreement with other people we don't know, that we will be kind to them so that the whole thing works. I mean, to me, it's an essential ingredient of civilization, not some kind of weakness or something. But yeah, I personally don't think that Bill was such a cynical or morally ambivalent person. I think he was just, I mean, there's the story of him, right? But the true story of Bill, as a young man raised by an abolitionist and a suffragette, had to work as a young man to support his mother after his father was killed for making speeches against slavery, then fought in the Indian Wars as a scout for Custer, you know, so he really saw the truth of the genocide of the Native Americans at the hands of the American military. He knew what happened. And as soon as he started doing these shows, he realized that's not what people wanted to hear. They did not want to hear the truth about the genocide of the Indians in the American West. They wanted to hear exciting stories of killing bear and, you know, like these kind of like, you know, almost like childish stories about adventure. And he thought, well, if that's what it takes in order to make a living now, because look, the truth was he was a former soldier. So what does an old soldier do? You know, after they retire, like he decided he was good at riding horses and shooting guns, and so he just decided to turn his skills into a show, and as a result, it gave him a life, but it also gave a life to people like Sitting Bull and some of these Native Americans who had been through the wars with him. Now they became his friends and his family, and he was paying them equal to the other white performers. So in a weird way, like, he wasn't such a cynical person. He created quite a nice life for himself and for the people in his shows. Now you could debate whether the myth making that he created, was it good for the world or bad for the world? You could debate that, but I don't think it was really it was entirely Bill's responsibility. Buffalo Bill was just giving audiences what they wanted to hear, you know. So I think the audience is just as culpable as Bill in terms of any, you know, guilt about the stories that were told.
And something I always found quite unique about your career is that you never let yourself be pigeonholed into one specific type of movie. You, like barely anyone else, you always manage to like juggle between quite serene, serious drama and laugh out loud comedy. Do you feel it's tough, like, to switch between these two extreme gears, and why do you feel are comedy and the tragic often so closely related?
Well, I think that, I mean, first of all, actors are often stereotyped not by themselves, they're stereotyped by the audience. Sure. And I've been very lucky in that way. You know, I do think it's unusual that an actor gets to do as many different things as I've done. But I have gratitude for the audience for allowing me to just accept whatever, for the audience accepting whatever it is that I'm proposing. I also think that empathy, it's not some special ingredient that I think it needs to be added to characters because it's my personal preference. I think that empathy, in playing a character with empathy, is really important, and it's because it's true. You know, I think that life, the truth about life and the truth about the human experience is that it's complicated. And there's all these gray areas. It's not so simple. It's not heroes and villains. In your own life, is it all heroes and villains?
For sure not.
No, so you move through. There are people who have flaws and people have strengths. And you're at a funeral and someone makes a joke, you know. You're at a birthday party and you realize that someone is very sick. You know, like, that's just life, and that's the truth about life. So, you know, I try to be sincere with my acting because I think that's the truth. You know, it's not so much like just an actor's choice. I think that that you lose something when you make something just black or just white.
Sure.
I forgot what the rest of the question was, but.
And one of a director who got both the extremes on the emotional spectrum of you would be none other than Paul Thomas Anderson, who you've been a frequent collaborator with, especially during his early era. What do you appreciate so much about his cinematic eye and his way of storytelling? Again, empathy. You know, Paul, that was one of the great features of Paul's writing from the very beginning, without a bunch of stage directions and explanation, just from the things people were saying to each other, and even in his first script, which I came here to Vienna with, you know, Hard 8, just the things that people say to each other, you could sense what they feel and what they're going through. And Paul is a very astute observer of the human condition, you know. Paul is someone, I think, even in everyday life, you know, because he's one of my closest friends, like, you can see, he sees what people are going through. You know, he might not always say it, but you can tell that he's registering exactly what people are going through. And that's why his films are so brilliant. He's really good at, like, knowing what people are going through moment by moment, even if the things that they're going through are very different from each other. And that's something I recognized right away in his writing, even before I saw him direct anything, you know. When he first sent me his script for Hard 8, I was like, wow, this guy. I said, you don't have an agent? And he's like, no. I was like, wait till the world gets a load of you. Like, your writing is just incredible. So, yeah, and of course he's gone on to, you know, prove himself over and over again, including with this latest movie, which I really love. So, yeah, I think Paul is also interested in what I was just talking about. Maybe that's why he and I started working together,
is that we both see the complexities of life, that like good people often have flaws, you know, villains often have a lot of humanity underneath whatever screwed up mentality they have. So yeah, truth in film, yeah, that's Paul's specialty, I think.
And next to acting, you also developed a second mainstay as a folk musician. What can you tell us about your newest musical project, Mr. Romantic? And what do you appreciate about your musical side of things that acting might not offer to you?
Yeah, so my new project, I have a show that I've created called Mr. Romantic. It's not so much in the folk music realm, it's more in the jazz kind of vocal realm. I sing songs from the American songbook, like Irving Berlin and Louis Armstrong and Frank Sinatra, that kind of thing. And it was a way to sing all those songs, but it was also a way to do a show that explores empathy, that explores love as a meditation, you know. Am I lovable? Could I love someone forever? Could you love me? Can you love someone you don't know? That's what really Mr. Romantic is about, other than being a clown show and being very funny and silly and teasing. You know, it's also kind of a deep meditation on what love is and what love means to different people. And music has always been, to me, like a very pure form of communication. You know, music, when you sing a song, it has a way of bypassing the brain. It goes straight into people's hearts, you know. And as an actor, someone who's always struggling with how to communicate, how to convey a feeling or an idea, music is such an easy route to people's hearts, you know. So I've always been really fascinated with music, and particularly with songs that last, eternal songs like Amazing Grace or something. You hear them one time and you're like, well, I'll never forget that song, you know. I've always been interested in what it is that makes music timeless, and what it is about the alchemy of the notes themselves, more than even the lyrics and the storytelling of the songs. What is it about the arrangement of notes that makes us feel certain things? That's really fascinating about music. Yeah, and it's always been a big part of my life ever since I was a little kid. It's always been there.
Awesome. And occasionally you also got to bring your musical gifts to the big screen, with a famous example being nothing else than Walk Hard, which has become this sort of cult classic and one of my dearest examples in your of movies in your filmography, which I think has even aged all the better as this weird sort of send-off of musical biopics, and has even become more poignant, I think. With the movie nearing its 20th anniversary, how do you look back on the cult legacy that it grew behind it, and the character of Dewey Cox?
You can't have a box office bonanza and a cult movie at the same time, but if I had to choose one, I think I would choose a cult movie, you know, because it didn't do so well when it first came out. It was a hard movie to explain to an audience, but it has since become such a beloved movie, especially among musicians, which I find personally very gratifying. Yeah, the 20th anniversary is in 2027, and I think we're going to go on tour again as Dewey Cox and the Hard Walkers and re-release the soundtrack. But also, you know, this character I played, Mr. Cellophane, in the film Chicago, is also really the beginning of this show, Mr. Romantic. You know, Mr. Cellophane was almost like the grandfather of Mr. Romantic or something. Yeah.
That's awesome to hear. I fear our time is unfortunately already up. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us, and we hope you enjoy your remaining stay in Austria.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure to be here with Ale and Matteo. This was the role of a lifetime. It's not the biggest role in the film. You'll see there's two other amazing actors that carry this story along. But I personally was always fascinated with the spaghetti western in particular. How is it that Italian people came to love cowboys so much?
And now, my dear friend, comes that bittersweet moment when I must bid you arrivederci. But before I do, I will leave you with this. If you must shoot, do not miss, and always aim for the heart.